or something, man.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, Jeff was just going into. So go on then, Jeff. Tell us about that thing about what it's usually like between me and thee when it comes to me trying to prize these anecdotes out of you.
You're very vague. Sometimes.
Okay. Okay. I'll go.
Do you want to tell that story again about the guy that day at that place?
Right then, folks, you leave your comments as to how good that impression is. Right, Jeff. So we have Christen here, ESTJ preferences, and Jeff ESFP preferences. So Jeff, I've got a request for you to tell a story, because I mentioned it to the other two about the a penny saved is a penny earned thing. So could you tell us the story about the Guardian sayings that you picked up from one or two of Keirsey's books and how you applied them in real life?
Of course, you caught me when I'm eating, but I can adapt. See, I thought Ben was going to like go through a profile thing or something, so I would have plenty of time to ease into things. But anyway, yeah. Well, the Guardian phrases I've come to see that play out in real life, because they will kind of utter cliches at times, and if there's ever a time where I kind of am tired of the topic where they're like at work, they're around me just sitting there complaining about their employees and stuff like that, I found that if I just throw out one of those cliches, then they'll usually kind of agree with me and forget what they were talking about.
Ooh, like everything happens for a reason.
It can be unrelated to what's going on.
So well, sometimes, but you know, but it's like they're legally required to stop to acknowledge the truth of the cliche. So
yeah.
So there was a time where they were, you know, just sitting around complaining about the employees, and I said, well, a penny saved is a penny earned, and this particular ESTJ stopped and said, you know, that's true.
I'm laughing so hard because that would work on me. I've got to write this down. Like, I've got to know the tricks to deal with myself.
Yeah. And the ISTJ in our office, I gave an example of just his philosophy at work when he came in and said he was bragging about how he had gotten a new television for a low price. He said, well, went on sale, but I waited, and they went back to full price. And then they went on sale again for lower than what the first time. So that's when I got it. And it just goes to show you, patience pays off.
I love it, though. Those are like grains of truth. It's like, oh, yeah, I love it.
And that would completely distract me from rambling on in a bunch of detail about some story about something that happened.
And this goes back to when I was saying about the NPs are good at like seeing a general truth, and the SJs love to use a general truth.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So me being naughty, like put it all on Jeff.
You threw out too many well-known phrases, and now I'm just like,
Yeah.
Yep. I guess that's the end of the talk now.
No, I'm sure Jeff has got other anecdotes, but yeah, we could attribute that to a good. I think the. So, Jeff, could you tell us more about how non-specific I am, and sort of like previous examples of like communication errors between the two of us?
Well, I mean, I actually gave a little bit too much detail when I was doing my impression, because a lot of times it's like, do you want to tell that story? And that's all he says. Or I just joined a chat that's been going for like 2 hours, and he'll suddenly say, Jeff, you've got a good experience with that. You've known an ENFJ in your life. What are your thoughts?
Oh. Jeez.
I think that's fairly true for INTP.
Here was the weird thing. We did an event on NE and NI, and I think I was sort of like bringing Jeff in to talk about communication difficulties, and we actually had difficulties in trying to talk about the topic. So I thought that was quite amusing. And it sort of unfolded live on air.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because what it is for me is I don't want to give too many details away because it will spoil the anecdote. So,
are you worried too that you'll tell it wrong? Like Jeff just has a good way of putting it.
yeah, I'm terrible at telling stories. I'm all right coming up with stuff on the fly or if I've written it out, but I'm not a good joke teller. Whereas Jeff, he knows how to tell that flustered and flair story.
Ben loves that one. And then it's always underwhelming to everyone else. I'd be like, that's it? It's not really much of a story.
Okay, what about the one with the guy with the bag of Doritos in his bag?
You and the Doritos again.
Yeah, the Doritos. This is the second time I've heard.
Remember, it's the one about your brother, and then what he said to your brother.
Mm-hmm.
And it says device not connected, but we have Shannon here.
Yay. Woo, Shannon, yeah.
Yeah, because she interested.
Properly hype.
Yeah.
Yeah, my younger brother and I used to walk or ride bikes, or one of us would be riding a bike and one of us would be walking somewhere many times when we were younger. And so there were different times where people passed by us walking or riding another bike or rollerblading or something and made some sort of comment to us that was funny. Like one of the times we were walking home from school where one of us was on a bike and the other was walking. So this old guy biked past us, and as he passed us, he said, "How about a bicycle built for two?"
Oh, jeez.
And another time, this guy roller skated up to us wearing a backpack with like a bag of Doritos sticking out of it. And my brother in those days liked to wear like black shirt, black pants, black trench coat, the whole deal.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy skates up and says, "A little more age and body mass and the all black outfit will be believable," and then just skates off.
Okay. Jeez.
Right then.
See, I never remember moments like this in life. It's fascinating to me.
And an ironic footnote to that story, later on, my brother gained more age and body mass.
Oh, jeez.
So,
See, that's the part of the impression I can't do because I can't make that sound. I can't say "so" the way Ben does, where it's like 4 syllables and it like weaves back and forth in the middle of the word. Like I can't do that sound. That's so. See, that's my terrible attempt that I can't do it.
Right. So we take some questions from the audience here on myths.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. So, what do you think? I'll ask. I don't know. Toss a coin. I don't know who to ask first. I don't want to show favoritism or anything. What do you think the biggest myths of guardians are, Jami? And then I'll ask Christen.
I would say that they're just neat freaks. All the time. I disagree with that.
Guilty. So guilty.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's true is that we can be set in our routines, and sometimes that means having particular areas cleaned up. We have to get cleaned up, but it doesn't mean that our entire house is like shipshape, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mine would be more on the routines and needing to follow a schedule or a calendar. I do live and die by my calendar, like everything goes in there, but it's all completely flexible. And I don't have a lot of day-to-day routine. That's one area in life I've been able to give myself a lot of freedom and really enjoy, is just kind of like going with either my energy flow or what comes up that needs to be done.
What would be your preference, though?
See, that's tougher. I haven't thought about that in a while.
Because it might just be that you're forced to be adaptable.
Right. Yeah, there's some part of that just there's parts of my life by design that require adaptability. I do like predictability in some ritualized things, but it doesn't have to be every second of the day. It can just be something where it's like, okay, generally late mornings on Saturday, this is what I like to do. But that's not regimented, and that doesn't have to happen. But
So
that
I have
would be
a question
preference.
for Christen, since it says rare that we have an ESTJ, at least that I've been in the chat. So the label that Keirsey subscribed to ESTJs was supervisor, and in my experience, I've known ESTJs that do sort of naturally gravitate to that role, where it seems like they're happiest when they're telling people what to do or instructing them in some way. Is that your experience? Is that what you enjoy, or is that not apply to you?
I find that the supervisor, that stereotype, and even in practice in life, is not taken well. So I try to do more mentoring or coaching. I think that's why I even started working with kids in a capacity, and found out the same thing. You can't like supervise and micromanage. Yeah, it's not readily taken up. I would say that's a tendency for me, and kind of like a default that I go into.
So what about those times where you kind of look around and people that you're not the boss of, or you're not the supervisor of, but you feel like they're doing the wrong thing, and you want them to get with the program? Do you still take charge in those situations, or do you restrain yourself?
I have a very strong desire to do that. And I usually catch myself with it, and I try to just do like drops of suggestions more so and see if they're picked up or not. So.
One thing I've noticed about like STJs in general is that they can be very like patient in terms of like telling you how to do something if they're there with you, assuming you listen. It's when you don't listen when it's like less I don't know how to put that, like less direct, I guess.
Yeah, I try to really notice if someone's receptive to it or not. You know, if someone's genuinely asking me how to do something, I can go right into, okay, this is exactly how you do it. If that's not received well, or they drop off at any point in time, I really try to notice that and go a different way, or drop it. Or go into what, if they really need to know the thing that they're asking about or that they're after, to try to go into, okay, like what's a type that would benefit them, or a type that they naturally listen to well, and see if I can adapt my language a little bit if it's something that really needs to be done and my natural kind of step-by-step instruction doesn't work.
There was this ESTJ woman that I worked with at an archive, and I had never used this system before, this computer system. And so I went through and did things to the best of my ability. And the next day she came in and she was like, okay, I know you don't understand how to do this correctly because I can tell. So I'm going to sit next to you and like show you. And at first I was like, oh, kind of off put, just because it's like, okay, you did this wrong. But had she not sat down with me and like literally went step by step with me, I would have been doing it wrong for the rest of my time, you know? So I was like very grateful for her like I don't know, effectiveness, I guess, in that regard, like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's always respected, but I think it's really awesome to see strong TE like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not respected if it's not welcome or if it's not perceived as helpful. And
Well,
that's
that's the thing though, is I see T as actually underlyingly helpful. It's just
Mhm,
people don't always realize that's what it's doing. It's trying to make things better, I think.
mhm. Or that I think ENTJs can be a similar way. So I'll group some of the ETJ preferences this way, that it can seem overbearing and like telling you what to do, and that they don't always communicate that they're doing it out of a place of helpfulness.
Right.
That was one of the biggest things I ran into with an ENTJ kid that I was tutoring, was that his mom actually said to me, I don't understand why he can't just be a kid. Like,
Oh, no.
he's always trying to orchestrate, like, you do this, you do that. We'll we'll move this object over here. We'll do this, we'll do that, and plan out. I mean, he'll want to plan out a whole day or a whole weekend for the family. And, to certain parents, it's like, oh, can't you just like go along? But he wasn't always mapping out his intentions and what he saw. Sometimes he was just like launching into what to do. So that was eye-opening for me to see. This is like 8 or 9 years ago, how a very young ENTJ tools could be used and how they could be perceived to other people. And he has an ENFP sister, so with that like very like bubbly, cheerleadery, wanting everyone to be happy and have a good time, I actually encouraged him to learn from her a little bit how she implemented her ideas, and that ended up, I think, working out pretty well for him, which was neat to see. Learning lesson for me too.
Yeah, I love the idea of a little child ENTJ, like, let's go, you guys. Like,
Like, I'm driving and telling me what to do and where to turn and how to get somewhere.
yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of like leadership qualities, let's say, even that young, it's like, whoa, I could never have done that. I was so like behind the scenes,
Mm-hmm.
that I look at that even in a kid and go, you got something,
Mm-hmm. It's just, how do you use it?
for good. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So you don't get a lot of ESTJs on video?
I think you are our first real one, because we did talk about Al Giardello in Homicide: Life on the Streets. And
wait a minute, did you just correlate me with something else?
yeah, but he was based on a real person though, and I don't know if the real person was ESTJ like. But one of the things that Jeff mentioned is that here's a guy that he'd been supervising the detectives for a long time, and even though his natural preference would be to tell them what to do and how to solve the crimes, he'd learnt to let them sort of have their own head. But when they came to him for advice, he would be, well, you do it like this, and this. So the preference would come through.
So you brought up that, kids that you were tutoring, but when you think back to like yourself as a kid, do you remember instances where you kind of like took charge on the playground, or, in situations where, even like you were shepherding other kids to do the way things you thought needed to be done?
I don't remember it because I think it just came very naturally for me. So that wasn't like a poignant memory or things that stood out. I have been told and made fun of many times though by my family and friends that I do that. I was like, what's unusual about that?
Yeah, one of the examples that we used when we did the video about the character Ben was talking about for Homicide was there was an episode where there had been a hostage situation, and then the guy that took the hostages had actually set himself on fire. And there were kids that had been injured or shot in the situation also. And the EMS or EMT people were like starting to work on the guy who had just been burned, you know, that was the hostage taker. And the ESTJ guy's like, you know, she needs help, talking about the girl that had been hurt. And they said, we'll get to her in just a minute, as they continue to work on the guy that had been burned. And he goes, you'll get to her now. You know, he just took charge of the situation, and then they did exactly what he said, even though he wasn't their boss. But it was him just in that situation, such a commanding presence, where he prioritized and said, this is what needs to be taken care of because it's the right thing to do now.
Yeah, I did that. I mean, I did that as recently as last month at work. There were some files I was accessing regularly that in my head were disorganized, not organized in a logical way or an easy to access way. So I just went in and reorganized them. I did let the other two people that were using those know, like, hey, I'm going to do XYZ, and reminded them again, and then went ahead and did it. And they were still kind of shocked, like, wait, you just did this? Because it didn't necessarily fall under my responsibilities to take that on, but I just saw that it needed to be done and took care of it.
I relate to the idea of doing what needs to be done if you see a need. Just like somebody's going to have to do it at some point. Like, I'm less apt to take up a leadership role, but if it's some kind of task, like, I'll just get it done.
Yeah. And that, I mean, I've found can even be a touchy thing, just doing it. That's like, when I was younger, I wouldn't have even probably let the other people that access those files know that I was doing it. I would have just gone in and done it and seen that it, like, oh, these can be organized in a better way, and just gone in and done it, and and probably told people about it after the fact. So yeah, that's been a learning point, is to, and even a step further than that now is like, okay, how can I bring other people into the process so it's not just me doing it or being perceived as steamrolling or taking it into my own hands.
Yeah, it's actually what I was going to ask next, because I'm thinking, what about a situation where you can't actually do it yourself for whatever reason? You don't have the expertise or the knowledge, or you simply don't have time, or what methods do you use to get other people to do it instead? I'm curious how you two differ in that, in terms of your way of getting people to do something.
Oh yeah. How about you, Jamie?
How we differ and how we get people to do stuff for us? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. When I need help with something, it's usually pretty easy for me to be like, here's the steps I tried, it's not working, can you help me? FE, and then it works. Like, people end up helping, I don't know.
I'm last spring, summer, I guess summer into fall, I was kind of coordinating like a short film shoot for one of my clients, and I know a videographer, and there was a dancer involved in stuff like this. So I really just took charge of what's everybody's schedule, what's everybody's availability, because we had about like anywhere from 3 to 6 people at a time that needed to be on site for certain shots at certain times, and what did they need to bring with them, and everything like this. So that was all delegating out just logistical stuff. So I'd say that as far as like stuff I can't do myself, I tend to look around me at who can do this or who has this as strength. And this is where I've really tapped into the personality types and typology, is who's good at this, who can do this better than I can, and, you know, let me reach out to them and try and get them either involved in what I'm doing or delegate something out to them.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like I didn't once in that scenario try and ask the videographer who she resembles an INFJ. So she has just a lot of skills that I don't. I mean, completely different skills that I don't. So I've known her for many years too. So I think at least that I readily recognize her strengths and what she does. So while we were shooting, I might notice she was having difficulty with something, and I've learned not to try and like tell her how to fix it or try to fix it myself, but to ask her like, hey, what do you need? What do you need? Like, can I move this or can I improve some aspect for you? And to be able to help in that way, without at all trying to jump in though, because she has a skill set that I don't have at all.
Yeah, so this is the moment. And so he did it with a lot more force.
Oh, I can't hear you, Ben.
Oh, no, not again. Oh, dear me. Right.
Back to our Foursquare.
Foursquare.
Yeah.
So Jeff, have you seen that in SJ types? Like, or what have been your observations
Seen what specifically?
about the way that they work with us, the others, or either ask for help or just command and jump in?
Yeah, well, that's kind of why I was curious the differences between you two specifically, because I've worked with both, ISFJs and ESTJs, kind of being the flip sides of the same coin. And ESTJs usually, seem, not surprisingly, seem like they kind of want to go ahead and take charge and take care of whatever it is themselves, or tell somebody directly, can you take care of this, or just take care of this, just as an order, although that aspect of it, I think, is influenced by sort of the seniority of the person they're talking to, because they're not ever going to talk to their boss that way, or even somebody who's been with the company longer than them or whatever. But they'll, so it's kind of influenced by that. But if it's like the new kid on the block, then they kind of talk to him much more like they are giving orders. Whereas ISFJs, it's much more like subtle and kind of not always worded exactly like this, but it comes off as kind of a, gee, I wish somebody would take care of this thing that needs to be done, and just sort of stating it in this way that's like, this is a thing that needs to be done, but hint, hint,
I mean, I could see that happening.
The thing is, for me, though, that I like to be asked. And so I hate that. I sort of see that kind of stuff as passive aggressive. And so it's like, if you want me to do it, ask me to do it, because then I know I'm doing it as a favor for you.
Yeah.
It's like if somebody says, this bin wants emptying. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'd always prefer somebody to be more direct with me. Like, I'm honestly, it's not that I like taking orders exactly, but I'd still like them to ask me in a way that makes it clear, they are asking me to do something, like you said, rather than it being more, gee, I sure wish somebody would do this thing kind of attitude. But there are a lot of people who behave like that, not just in work situations, but in terms of, a spouse or a friend or whatever who like wants somebody to give them something or things like that, but they kind of have that same, just throw out the information. Goes back to that whole informing versus directing thing, because they'd rather inform people that this is something that they want rather than directly ask for it.
Maybe they do it because it leaves the choice up to you, whereas if you specifically ask and someone gets uncomfortable, that would make an ISFJ feel uncomfortable. Like, oh, why did I even ask them then? Like, I feel bad,
Yeah, and in the work
don't wanna
situation, I've had an
impose.
ISFJ tell me, I don't like confrontation, so I didn't want to directly, confront you about whatever this was. But I said, well, that's the only way I'm going to actually know and change anything, though, is if you do have to confront me at least a little bit.
Fair, yeah. Bring your sword.
Oh, Jeff, I remember something. You were in an event with Cowell, and you said you went on a course for how to communicate and deal with customers. And I think you said you learned one really good thing about what to say to the customers.
No, you lost me there.
And it's
Like a
something like, I think
particular-
it's like, I'm here to understand your problem. It's like, listen to their problem or something. How can I help?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very Ben remembered enough of the vague idea that I think I know what he's talking about.
Hmm.
Way back when I was working as a McDonald's manager, in the training for that, they said, that a huge majority of the customers that complain just want someone to listen to them. So the number one thing is listen to their complaint. Don't interrupt them, let them say whatever it is they want to say. Obviously, if they just keep talking for 20 minutes, you eventually have to kind of cut them off because you can't spend your entire workday listening to the complaint. But as much as you can, just let them explain to you what the problem is, because a huge number of people are actually already satisfied just that you listened. And then the next thing is to ask them, what can I do for you to make this right? How can I fix the problem? Because the other thing people want is for someone to genuinely care about the problem and that they can be fixed. So those are like the top two things. And they said like somewhere between 80 and 90% of complaints are basically already solved by those first two things. And you never get into any of the other more complicated stuff. Because the mistake that managers make, or employees in general, when customers start complaining, is they either get defensive or they try to make excuses, or they say, oh well, such and such is new, or we've had a really hard day. Like, customers don't care about that because it's like, well, they've had a hard day too, or they know what it's like to be shorthanded or whatever. So it doesn't really matter. Like, it's not going to affect what the problem is. So you turn the customer off by giving them irrelevant information. I think that's what you're referring to, Ben.
Yes, Jeff, that was it.
I'm not sure how it directly relates to what we were talking about, but I'll let you draw the connections if you want to.
I think I'll draw a connection in the future, but it's relevant to like, I suppose that it's something that could look like a different personality type. If someone was just typing of that specific behavior, somebody might say, oh, this is indicative of that type. And it's like, no, I just learned that.
The behavior of the employee or the customer?
No, the behavior of you, in terms of like, if they saw that, like you listening to them, like someone might say, oh, he's very other focused, and he's listening to them and might say, oh, this person looks like an FJ. And it's like, no, it's a learned skill that I happen to agree with.
Right. Yeah. And that's the kind of thing that I think in Keirsey's book, Brains and Careers, it would have said, some people are much more naturally prone to that behavior anyway. That's going to be their natural instinct. And other people, that's a tough lesson they have to learn, because they have to go against their instincts to do those things. Like the, aforementioned ENTJ kid.
Yeah, or my own. That's, yeah. I think my types are personally, I can say I've been prone to that. It's like, oh, you have this issue? The simplest fix in the world, just do this. And I'll voice that right away without fully hearing. So when you were describing that, Jeff, the one just listening until the other person is finished. Like you said, not letting them go on forever, but until they've mostly finished, and letting them know they've been heard is a huge thing. This is covered. There's quite a few like sales stuff, customer service, HR courses that I've been through that cover stuff like that. Is genuinely hearing a person, even inquiring one or two things, and how far that goes.
Yeah, and I have to do it in my job over the phone mostly, which can work both ways. It can make it better and it can make it worse depending on the person that you're speaking to with that also. But the good thing for me, because I'm not a personality that really enjoys like, I don't know how to put it. And I don't like it to be my responsibility to solve problems. I can do it sometimes, but it's sort of a necessity rather than a desire. So the good thing about my job is that when I'm taking a complaint, I'm almost never the one who actually has to solve the problem. I'm passing it on to someone else. So it's pretty easy for me to be like, listen to it and then say, you know, okay, what can we do in, you know, okay, and this is the person that's going to actually be responsible for doing the thing. So I'm going to pass you to that person, or take your information and have them call you back so you two can actually like straighten this out.
Mm-hmm.
Which is good for me because, you know, then I get to talk to a person, maybe get to know them a little bit, but ultimately not have anything that happens to them in the future beyond my responsibility. So for an ESFP, that's perfect.
Yeah, that's pretty perfect. You get to help them feel heard, appreciated, let them leave happy, but you don't have to implement the item.
Right.
It's going to satisfy them. Yeah.
Do you like taking on responsibility, Kirsten? Like, is that important to you?
I think I just do it without, reflexively.
I believe my my husband's an ESTJ, and one of his things is like he wants to be a provider. He wants to be like in charge of his group at work. He wants like to be the head of whatever hub he's in, but he does the same thing where it's like he just naturally sort of rises to that.
Mm-hmm.
And if he ever like fails in some way by his own like code, he'll get very like upset about that. But it's interesting because I put on Twitter like, hey ESTPs, like, do you seek out this responsibility in a similar way? And most people said no. I found that interesting.
Sometimes it's very much in how you word stuff. Like ESTPs won't say yes to responsibility, but if you say problem solving, or, you know, you put it in a way where it's like, you know, can you swoop in and fix this thing that needs to be fixed? You know, then they'll say yes to that. Like they want to have that be what they're in charge of, as opposed to the word responsibility is kind of one of those buzzwords that SPs are going to go away from. We don't want that.
Feels
like
restrictive.
Yeah.
Inconsistent, I think. Like you are the person over time to go to.
Right. I think ESTPs are often called, you know, the best people in a crisis situation, because they're the least likely to be distracted by any of those other things that do have to do with the responsibility that all the other that a lot of the other types are worried about. Like, oh, if I do it this way, I'm going to have this image, or if I do this thing, it's not going to fill this particular duty. Whereas an ESTP will just like go in, get the job done, get out is their attitude. They don't care who gets, you know, their feelings ruffled or any of those other aspects. So
I think that's pretty common with the SC function overall, which is commonly ESP types, is that being able to jump in and just do stuff and push other things aside and just look at what needs to be done at the time or in the immediate future. I've seen a lot of too, like planning for fun stuff. They can be very thorough and good about it too, like a hike or an adventure trip, or getting together a game night, stuff like this. And there's a fair amount of responsibility in getting a group of people together to do stuff like that.
Yeah, I think
that
the
I've seen with
difference is
people
just
in my
with
life.
SP types, they're not going to focus on it as the responsibility part. That's not going to be what they're thinking, because as soon as you start thinking about responsibility, then it feels like an obligation rather than something fun that you get to do.
Yeah, what would be a word to describe that then?
I don't know. I think what I've heard from ESTPs specifically, like I said earlier, is what they'd like to solve problems. So if you put them to it as, here's this problem we need solved, then they like enjoy doing that. But if you say, we need someone to take responsibility for blah, 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 then it's like immediate turnoff. So
like the quiet person in a meeting when you say that.
Yeah.
Someone I think said that they didn't want responsibility, but they wanted authority,
Hmm.
which is an interesting nuance, because wouldn't you have some responsibility then if you were an authority?
Yeah, and it's not that you don't have it; it's just in the way that it's termed, where the focus is. That's what I try to get across to people when it comes to SPs. I mean, all temperaments. It's like they can do the same actions, but have a focus. The focus is on something different. So they can look like they're doing exactly the same thing, but if they if they looked at it with the perspective you're looking at it as, it would be a completely different activity then. So it's it's all in how you kind of focus, or how you word things in terms of the appeal. So in general with SPs, I think the more it seems like an obligation or a duty, the less interest we're going to have in it. The more it seems like a spontaneous idea that just sounds like a fun, cool thing to do, then the more we're going to be into it.
It's kind of interesting because, like, we're talking about guardians today, and one of the big key terms for guardians is actually tradition or traditional. And that's a term that I've always been, like, lukewarm about because I don't necessarily feel that way. I have to really make it stretch for me to identify with it.
Yeah, I think that's one of those that, again, is also affected a lot by like age and culture and things like that. There's kind of more. There's some people that are just going to be more prone to point to those things, and others that just sort of, they realize over time as they get older, they might be able to look back and say, oh, I guess in some ways I was traditional, but that wasn't really what I was necessarily trying to do.
Is
Yeah.
is conventional a better word than traditional?
Closer. Not quite it.
Orthodox?
That's worse.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I think the idea is that each SJ personally develops their own kind of normal, you know?
Right.
So it's like,
yeah, it doesn't have to be like on a societal level or group level. I think it more comes from, with that SI function being in the top two, like an experiences. So more like learned procedures or learned methods, proven methods, something like this.
Interesting.
Even just how you use the word normal. Like, I think, SJs are like the most likely to use the word normal as a positive term. Whereas I think other temperaments kind of look at that as, they sort of take pride in being abnormal sometimes. Whereas most of the time, guardians are going to look at normal as being a good thing.
Yeah. I, for a long time, took offense to being called abnormal, or that I don't fit into the norm. Yeah.
I feel, similar. I remember someone telling me I was weird and then feeling very like, oh, that means I'm not accepted. I don't want to be not accepted,
Whereas I think weird actually sounds a little bit good to NPs. Like if someone says to an MP, "Oh, that film's a bit weird," oh, I want to watch it then.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. I think all three of the other temperaments respond to weird or abnormal as almost a compliment, in varying degree depending on who they are and what they're doing. Because sometimes it could be in how you say it, like an ENTJ, for instance. Like it might be, that was like a unique idea or innovative thinking or something that they're going to take a lot.
Right.
Take that as a compliment. If it just said weird or abnormal, I might not necessarily take that great, but maybe, depending on the situation.
Well, being called unique seems like a compliment, but like that seems more positive to me than weird. Like weird seems a little rougher,
Whereas if somebody calls me weird, I say, they called me mad at the university.
Yeah.
Or unusual is another one. Like, I might spew something out and someone says, "Oh, how unusual." I'm like, what? Wait a minute. What do you mean by that?
I like being called unorthodox. That's a good one. I think So, I mean, Jeff would be. I was going to talk about creative subtypes, but so like I think Jeff and I are both creative subtype of, but Keirsey's artisans are pretty much all creative subtype, and his guardians are like all normalizing. It's like there because the guardians wouldn't be normal. So I was just wondering. So Christen, have you got Victor's book?
No, I hadn't heard of him until until kind of finding your channel and everything.
Right. So I was just wondering if what does, because again, busting stereotypes. So Jeff, did you name some creative SJs? I think you mentioned Kevin James, a comedian. Or
Well, yeah, I mean, I probably think of quite a few. But first, I remember the last time you asked about that, the first two that came to my mind were Jay Leno and Kevin James, because they're both stand-up comedians. Because you would ask for somebody who an SJ that maybe is in a profession that's seen more as an SP profession. So those are a couple that I thought of. But if you listen to their act, you know, so much of it is, especially Kevin James's comparison of, you know, how it used to be versus how it is now. And the whole, you know, act is sort of focused on the juxtaposition of, hey, remember when this was this way and now it's all weird. It's like this, you know, and it's very much a comparison of the familiar to the strange, you know, from past to present kind of stuff. And even the way they respond to something like a joke bombing or being heckled or something like that is kind of more in a traditional sense. They tend to go to the same lines and say the same, you know, kind of sort of prepackaged comic put downs. And I don't say that like in a way to insult them, you know, it's sort of the tried and true is what they think is right, including in comedy. You know, it's like, well, this joke works, so you might as well keep using it. You know?
Yeah, I noticed that with Jay Leno. When a joke didn't work very well, he went back to like these prepackaged comments on about the joke not working very well, and the same thing. But a lot of comedians out there.
How would you type?
Like the catchphrases of you know, Leno, because how many often he says like, this is true. You know, people have, when they do parodies of him, they always have him say that because it's the thing he says so much.
How would you type Jay Leno?
My guess would be ISFJ. And same thing with Kevin James. I think they're both ISFJs.
I don't know that I know Kevin James's.
Jeff, did they ever with
Kevin James is probably best known for King of Queens TV show and the mall cop movies and just a few examples.
Okay.
If we're talking about, sorry. Okay. If we're talking about like celebrities that are of the SJ temperament, I've seen Hugh Jackman typed as an ESFJ, and I remember this one time, like he played Wolverine in all the X-Men films, that he had a premiere for a movie for one of the X-Men films actually, and it ran late, and he felt really bad about all the people waiting in line, so he bought like coffee and donuts for everyone and distributed them, which seems like such an ESFJ thing to do. Like, oh, I'm gonna support you guys. It's okay. Thank you for being here.
It's very ESFJ. I have a couple ESFJs in my life, and they're exactly like that. Like always showing up with treats and goodies, and oftentimes like very personal. Like they just have a good eye for what people like and would want.
Yeah. They're lovely.
I think so.
Of course you do.
So Chris, before we went on there, we talked about functions and then someone's development. And you appear to be someone you'd like put yourself in a lot of situations where like communicating with these children and adapting and saying things in a way that they'll understand. And so someone could look at look at you and what you can do in the area of interpersonal skills. And then if they look at the model of ESTJ, and they'll say, well, they've got this function here. She's not got FE in her function stack. She can't do this, you can't do that. But then the actual applied skills, where someone might have to look more carefully to say, look in a more nuanced way to see your ESTJ preferences, rather than just looking at the stereotype, and where someone will go, she doesn't seem bossy enough to be ESTJ.
Oh, wow.
I hope so. No, I can be quite bossy. But with the concept that maybe some of what I do falls in the FE bucket, I can see that perception. It's a learned thing from the FJ types around me and seeing how they do things. And it's just part of the getting into typology too, and understanding that, okay, people think differently than I think. People do things differently than the way that I do. And they somehow are still alive and even doing well in life. So how is that possible? And, you know, maybe that they, like when I look at kids, that they need to be encouraged to do it their way, their path of success, because their path isn't going to look like mine. So I think I've put it into a framework like that, and to kind of like practical application. So it's not as touchy-feely as maybe it sometimes seems or might look like to an outsider. I actually, at like kind of a professional development class I was coaching, got complimented by a participant that so many of my stories revolved around other people, and that I was very caring. And I was like, wow, I would like love to share that to the personality community. But it comes from using some of the different typing systems to understand other people and to promote them in their own way.
That's why I don't like looking at people as stacks of functions, because it's like oh, you've got this list of things that somehow you've got in your toolbox or whatever, and I'm like, an individual person can learn all kinds of methods and things to do, and they're not like restricted into this, you know, box or model of this is what they are allowed to do based on their inborn traits. So
yeah, I mean, there's
that kind of bothers, the kind of thing where it's like, oh, you don't have this function, therefore you must mistype yourself if you do this thing. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So
yeah, I mean, there's freedom of everyone for how they're going to develop. I think there's patterns and ways that people can naturally develop more easily versus like trying to develop in other ways might be really difficult. I think there's patterns in that. There's definitely a lot of freedom though in the way that people develop and what skill sets and tool sets they develop, which can be by choice or by accident or life circumstance.
yeah, I think some people even use type to justify certain behavior, you know, like certain ENTPs, for instance. It'll be like, well, that's, you know, I'm an ENTP, so I'm supposed to be a jerk. So therefore I don't have to worry about like, you know, trying to take care of your feelings because that's just my type, you know.
Yeah,
it's like, no, everyone's capable of actually respecting people and not being a jerk all the time, regardless of what their type is.
Actually, let me see if I can find this. You might like this, Jeff. There's I ran into that quite a bit too when I started looking at typology. Is a lot of the pushback on any typing system is putting someone into a box. And then it's like, well, I don't perfectly fit this stereotype or that stereotype, or I know someone that breaks the mold in this way or that way. And especially on the positive and negative thing, there's something called oh, this is going to be rich. Can't wait for the pushback on this. Maybe I'll wait to say the name of it for just a moment while I do the idea. I forgot where I got this from. So it's that some people come from like a really like a crazy hyper negative place. Like I am just like, I have terrible circumstances around me. I'm a terrible person and it's always going to be this way. And other people come from a hyper positive way of like, I have a lot of people that support me. I'm wonderful. I can do anything in the world. And that like you take a typology system like Myers-Briggs or the cognitive functions, and anybody can fall anywhere on that stack. So like an ENTP being like, well, I'm just, always going to be like a little bit of the like trickster, poking, causing trouble type, that's like more on the negative end of the scale. But that there are ENTPs though that are higher on the scale, and they use that like creative wordplay and innovation thing to like invent something new or come up with a new system, or they take pride in like breaking the mold. That just because let's just say, like with my education background, like just because education's always been this way doesn't mean it has to be, and they'll even take pride in breaking the way that their school does something. So that's like a little bit of that trickster breaking the mold thing, but they're applying it in a positive way. And that there's a scale of kind of positive and negative that anyone can fall on from, again, like either life circumstances and or by choice.
It makes me think of, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Made me think of Weird Al, actually, who I've seen typed as ENTP. You can argue that, I guess, though. But he's so positive and is so creative and just keeps like doing all these different things from a abundant mindset, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Frequently, you mentioned ENTPs. I mean, frequently ENTPs will also be like a 7, and there's this thing here where like you got here like level 3, just more discipline.
The healthy level. Okay, yeah.
And this is what I would like more of this in Jungian type. A look at what the types are like at different health levels. And it is actually there. It's just that no one has bloody read Van der Hoop, and he was the first person to write 16 type descriptions.
Who was that again?
It's J.H. Van der Hoop.
Hoot, like an owl?
Hoop.
Hoop?
Here.
H-O-P, or is it H-O-O-P?
I'll just click on this. There he is.
Oh,
Van der Hoop.
Yeah.
Hoop, like
and in
loop.
this book,
Okay.
because this is going to be I'm reading this because I'm researching for my functions book. You've got the type descriptions, and then you've got them for various levels of mental health, because he was a psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm.
And the INTP as well. He called himself an introverted thinking type with auxiliary intuition. So, and there you go. That's the stuff where he's actually talking about some sort of like consciousness. And I showed this to you before, that he had that 8-function model.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I recall you mentioning
this guy died in 1950. Died in 1950, but he's got a 8-function model, and hardly anybody. And I learned about this guy from Shalina. So I don't know why I had a rant about people not knowing about Van der Hoop, even though it was mentioned in Gifts Different at the back.
That is, I think you'll quite like the Naomi Quank. She focuses a lot on the 4th function. So this is Was That Really Me, which is like kind of the types, how everyday stress brings out our hidden personality. So it's kind of like the different types at their worst. She uses the 4-letter coding for the types, but she talks about the 4th function. So like with mine ESTJ, it would be FI. And she's got descriptions and examples from ESTJs of them. She calls it the grip experience, and getting yourself out of it so that you can get back to your strength or your good side.
If you look at this book, I've not read it yet, but Shalina has. She might have ripped off Marie-Louise von Franz, because I actually showed a book to Shalina recently, and it was one written, and it was this one. And basically, this guy had ripped off Marie-Louise von Franz, because she typed people with Carl Jung, and so she was she was 40 years younger than Carl Jung, so she was around in relatively modern times. And this is her only typology book.
Yeah, she's got von Franz in her references.
Oh, yeah, good. Yeah, so she probably got it from.
Yes,
from
the
her.
inferior function. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's got in her references, just to give an overview. A lot of young, obviously, a couple Myers, and then she's actually got a fair amount of her own quank. I'm guessing reference papers that led into this book would be just a crazy hypothesis. And then she's got von Franz, the inferior function from Jung's typology.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's got that in here.
Right. Yeah.
I'm going to write a book called Carl Jung Was a Knobby Old Twit.
Well, I think you would write an awesome book, Jeff. You would write an awesome book because I know you have it in you because you've written good reviews of Doctor Who stories.
Doctor Who, huh?
Yeah, there's an ENTP that's not always a jerk.
Well, unless it's Sixth Doctor.
I was going to say, not always. I didn't say...
Yeah, not always.
Just not always.
Yeah, so I like the Vanderhoop. You mentioned those levels of growth, and the Enneagram. I like that one quite a bit. There's something called the tone scale too, which kind of goes into this, and that's a little bit more. That other one's just a little bit more growth for anyone. Not unsimilar to what Jeff said about listening to people and then asking a follow-up question or two so that they're really heard. That's just kind of a general thing as humans that we want to feel heard and like we connect with other people. So it's really interesting to look at these other kind of tools and how to grow as a person, and then to put them into some of the typology things like, oh, this is a tool that this type's likely to like. This is a tool that this type's likely to like.
Yeah, and this book by Dario Nardi, which copyright 2005, is such a good book. 8 Keys to Self-Leadership, and it's sort of framed as like functions might not be real, they're just a model, but the things that Dario associates with them are useful, even if they don't really go in those buckets. Then he actually has exercises in here, and he has 50 pages at the back, which is gold, and they'll have things like preference versus ability. Like, and again, certain things that, like, for instance, INTJ is not super happy at being jolly and organizing people and being happy with them, but you know, they can learn some skills in that area, and ultimately you can sort of bring it down to a level of what skills does this person have, which skills do they prefer, which ones do they work on, which ones do they have to work on because of circumstances. And I mean, getting it down to the practical level. So I wonder, Christen, do you actually teach type or use type? Have you ever actually taught type? And if you did, would you concentrate on the practical aspects of how to sort of...
Yes, I would
absolutely
skills. I would absolutely do the practical aspects. I've had a couple friends and colleagues in my life that are curious about it and ask enough. It's usually romantic relationships that they're interested in first. You know, like, this is my partner, I want to have the best life possible. How do we get along, and can we? And then also with colleagues, then it's usually coming from a place of difficulty or some kind of clash. That's what I found. So with kids, I have not taught them what their type is. It's done tutoring for English, reading and writing, and math too. And it's a lot of times it's because the kids are either excelling beyond what's going on in their classroom, or they're falling behind. So they're outside the norm. Right. And that something that they're doing isn't quite fitting what's expected of them in the classroom, by their parents, by their peers. So that's when I try to recognize what functions they have that are strong and how they can use those to their benefit in learning. Or that, like, whatever, a lot of times too, like, I had a student with math who was like, I just can't do it. I'm bad at it and I'll never be able to do it. And so this was like a very built construct in his head that was forming, that was solidified. So before I tried to at all show him how to do math, it was more of, how can I get through to you? And this was looking at the relationships that I think are mostly outlined in Socionic, like the superego and the circle of benefit, or the completely flipped letters, where the person can talk to them on a very subconscious level to get through some of that built-up barrier that he had formed.
I remember.
So I've done that more in my wording of explanation, versus not trying to tell him like, hey, you know,
Right.
I'm observing this type in you, and here's a way you can, just more in my language and my explanations in the topics of our lessons.
Could you give an example of, say, a child where you're explaining something and then you switch to like another type that's in the benefit room, because this will make it like real for the audience, like as an example of explaining something from a different point of view, because this is like this is the most complicated relationship in socionics. It's social benefit.
Okay. Yeah. So young gal who was learning to read, and she just wasn't interested. She was an ENFP. She wants to go, she wants to have fun, and she wants to pick up the easiest book in the world and be like, oh, okay, I read for 15 minutes, I'm done. So to encourage her to read something that was at a higher level and to move up and to see any point in progress, or to value progress, I guess, versus valuing like just being able to get up and go about her having freedom to do what she wanted. That's what she really wanted. So she benefits from ESFJ. So I phrased reading as how well liked she was going to be by her peers, and how admired she would be by her social circles, by her teachers, by her parents, and stuff like this. So ESFJ, looking at like group inclusion and kind of tried and true methods, and tapping into some of that FI self-importance, I guess, even also. But this is just what I saw from ESFJs in my life who were encouraging their kids to read, was like, oh, but just imagine like if you're excelling past the rest of the class and how good that'll feel, and you'll be able to do this, you'll be able to do that. You know, you can even teach your younger cousin how to read or how to do this. So I encouraged her in that way to try higher level reading materials. And it actually went over really well. That's when she started kind of self-guiding and picking her own books that were tougher. I mean, she was trying to read like well below what she was capable of. She just wanted to bebop off and have fun. Yeah, so I don't know if you can pull up. I guess I could draw out the circle of benefit real quick.
Well, I mean, I've got the Keirsey names for them on screen, where you've got mobilizer ENTJ, advocator ENFP, promoter. Have you got a graphics tablet there, or are you just going to put a bit
pen and paper?
Pen and paper and hold it onto the camera.
Don't break it if it's not broken.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, I'll just click on your box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see if I can do this. This like feels very backwards. ENFP benefiting from ESFJ. So ESFJ too is like very from what I've observed and parents that resemble this, is that they're very hands-on, will like sit down with their kids and read side by side, and when they come across a word, stop and tell them how it sounded out and stuff like that. So I did a lot of that with her also. Like I couldn't just give her a tactic and leave her on her own to do it most of the time. It was this like one-on-one, side-by-side time in a very affectionate way, like allowing conversation to drift off to more personal stuff before bringing it back to like whatever the exact topic was that we were on. So that's her. So this is the circle of benefit that the ENFP benefits from the ESFJ. So these arrows are a direction of benefit, and then that the ENFP gives benefit to the ENTJ, ENTJ gives benefit to ESTP, and so on. And I mentioned earlier in the conversation also the ENTJ benefiting from his ENFP sister to learn how to be his little field marshal self in a more socially acceptable way. And that was off of this relationship that I encouraged him, the same family, to look back on his younger sister as an example.
So how does it play out with the introverts? Because you know the types are different between MBTI and Socionics. So I wonder if you might have something to say about that, about the types.
No, I have tried so many times, like, to map out the first 4 functions, like in these circle of benefit, the first 4 functions and how they crisscross between. They make more sense to me with the extroverted types than they do the introverted types. But the introverted types, they do make sense as to why a certain type benefits from the other type in their circle of benefit. Let's see if we can look at one in particular. Well, ISFJ, and I just to keep my head in one place, can go. The same family also had an ISFJ kids, which was like fascinating too, to be able to see all these different relationships in real time. So like this is one of the introverted ones. Another, and sticking with some of the same stories. So I can't do math, I'm just bad at it. It was an ISFJ kid, and he benefits from ISTP.
Yeah.
Which was pretty hard for me to emulate. Because I like the hands-on tactical thing. The closest I could get with him was the very step-by-step, in detail, and having it pre-mapped out, actually, because I just naturally will go extemporaneous and explain something off the top of my head as a process. So I would practice step-by-step. We were doing a lot of multiplication division at the time. So I would actually pre-do a problem step-by-step on paper on my own before I would show it to him, and have it already mapped out, and do something like cover a piece of paper and let things out one at a time for him. So it was already pre-mapped out and just showing him one step at a time. And I'm not really even sure if I hit that on in my explanation. That was just my best interpretation at the time with him that did work.
So how would that be when you said you mapped it out for him? Mm-hmm. How different would that be from, say, if you were emulating, say, ISTJ? What would you do differently if you were emulating ISTJ? Because it's one of these types. Because then, in Socionics, that's what is it, SLI here, and this is one that varies a lot depending on whether it's normalizing or creative subtype, whether it's like ISTP or ISTJ. And I'm wondering, via your experiments, whether you could sort of say who's got it right, which type should be in this ring. Should it be ISTP or should it be ISTJ? Because Socionics thinks it's a type, thinks it's what has it got it here? It's got it as SL. So which is SLI, which is SLI is usually, when you read the profile, it's like ISTP.
Wait, which would match the benefit ring I was mapping out? You were saying, though, different interpretation, or rather translation between Socionics.
Yeah, for those, because sensory
and
introverts...
Myers-Briggs would be ISTJ giving benefit to the ISFJ, right? Is that the question you're posing?
Right. So, okay, well, I was looking at the left introverts. So the right introverts would be... Yeah, this one would want... This one should be ISTP.
Okay.
ISTP. But the problem is the type, the Socionics type, LSI. This is exactly the one. This is exactly the case. Because this type, if it's creative, it sounds like ISTP. If it's normalizing, it sounds like ISTJ. So maybe, I don't know how many INTJ kids you've had to teach and have to teach them in ISTP. But you mentioned there you were teaching ISFJ, so
Yeah.
that is here though. That is in that ring.
Yes.
And you
It
said,
is, right.
and you said that you were talking in ISTP.
That was one of the things I tried. Yeah.
Right. But you weren't talking in ISTJ. So what would
I mean,
what did,
my natural explanation type, just as an ESTJ, is going to have like some stuff in common with an ISTJ. It's going to be different
Right.
order, nuanced, but it's not going to be much of a stretch for me to rearrange my wording.
right.
And I can tell you the way that I naturally taught, especially stuff like the procedural stuff like that, really frustrated him. I had to be a little bit more planned out and methodical by it. Like with an ENTJ kid or INTJ, the just kind of like top level procedural stuff, like sticking with division or multiplication, it can be kind of like off the cuff where they want to make up a number or make up a problem and ask me how to do it. And I can just go through the procedure with it,
Right.
and they'll follow along. ISFJ, though, I did not find that at all. It's like that was not welcomed for me to just kind of extemporaneously write numbers down and go through the process. They seem
Right.
to get caught up in like, well, where did these numbers come from? Like, you can't just make up a problem and show me how to do it. Like, this needs to be preset.
So that's consistent with Socionics seeing ISFJ as TE blind spot. So, but if you were to look at ISFJ from their outside behavior, you would say, yeah, but they're quite good at logistics. But I suppose it's that more different kind of TE that goes beyond logistics to. I mean, I've frequently explained it like this, where it's like ISFJ is bad at ENTJ kind of TE, where it's more speculative and risk taking. And more,
Can you say that again?
Is bad at ENTJ TE rather than ESTJ TE. I think ISFJ could pretty much do ESTJ kind of TE because it's still within the same logistical intellect of.
I would say the students I've seen like that, they can emulate it a decent amount. I would guess that's from speculation that they've internalized it as like, okay, this is the way things are done.
Yeah.
And looking at people around them too, if it's someone they respect.
Right.
Like, oh, okay, like this is the way things are done. I can repeat this or have a part in this.
That's a good point, Christen. I'm going to put that in the memory bank about the difference in that, and because ENTJ will be using their TE in more of an individualized, speculative way that's not been done by others, and so ISFJ is going to look at that and go, "Hang on a minute, this has got no track record, and you've got this like risky." Business planning going into the future. Yes. At least, I suppose, with the ESTJ version, they can say, well, it's worked in the past, and I like to go with what works.
Right.
So you can see that little clash there between functions and temperament and how it nuances it, that relationship there. Yeah.
And then I can't recall at all, but the same student, the ISFJ student who was having trouble with math at the time, I had my dad's an INTJ, and I at the time asked him how he would explain multiplication and division to him. And I can't recall at the time because that's like, I don't know, NI is like so outside, but I just remember taking that INTJ explanation of it and replicating it with my student who had ISFJ preferences, and it went over pretty well.
Right. So, folks, we'll be talking more about this in future, hopefully with Dario and Victor, and it's like real world examples of this. Because they tried to use experiments with like just put a bunch of people together and see if these groups magically work. And they only did it for about half an hour. It's like, no, you've got to have people in teams. You've got to have like a whole television series about it, like these different groups, like putting them through a project and watching them how they. It would have to be like a season-long TV thing.
Yes. Oh my
see how
gosh, I would love that. Like a control group too, of like a random group of 4 people trying to accomplish a task. It's starting to sound like Survivor. And then a pre-planned group, you know, like a circle of benefit, and see if there's a difference in success, maybe of accomplishing the task, also in satisfaction of the people during the process.
Yeah. So the way I just saw it was, I just using the Keirsey names for the types. I just thought the roles that they're good at seem complementary. So, like I said, you've gone into the role of you literally enact the role of educator, and you've got your natural predisposition towards supervisor. And you've also got to, now I changed it for ENTP because we know that not just inventors, and most of the time they are debaters. And I got here, Feynman was called well, I had the dot, yeah, he was called the Great Explainer. Yeah, that's it, the Great Explainer. And then you've got the performer. So I mean, with the children, you do have to like maybe debate with them to get the point across, and then hold attention as well. So if I look at those 4, they do seem, those roles seem complementary. And I said before with the ESTJ, it's, you don't do it like that, you do it like this. And then they then go into the role of educator.
But wait, is there another way to do it? The debater.
Yeah. So I just thought, hang on a minute, and I did it like this, just sort of like a proof that I wasn't just making connections. Whereas, like, okay, if you've got educator, pick one out of those 4 from the STs that goes best with educator, and then pick one of those 4 out of NTs, and then one of those out of SFs, and then all of the ones that I picked that were complementary. Because I actually came up with this to other people, and I said, okay, which ones are you going to pick that go together? And it's just weird that all of the ones that go together are from the same benefit room.
Yeah.
So how come the performers checked?
Because I think they hold attention. If you're a teacher, you've got to hold the attention of the pupils.
Okay.
Well, have you done that, Christen? Like that, you've gone, maybe I have to do a bit of ESFP here.
Oh, yeah, and hitting, if I think it's going to help, that would be something that would work on my own type, I think, is a bit of the performer thing, to overly demonstrate something. And I'm just thinking out loud here and processing this as I'm saying it. I think that performer, the overly demonstrating something, would help me get over that I already know how to do this, or I already know how this is done, and to be able to see a new or different way.
Jeff, do you think that the ESTJs can get into the educator role? And like, do you think it's sort of, it's like that thing where they'll tell people how they're doing it wrong and then tell them how to do it the right way?
Yeah, and I think, I can't remember which video it was, but I talked about how like some people learn better from certain types of teachers, I think. Yeah. And so a lot of a teacher's role is of course talked about as well. They've got to figure out an individual student, but this, I think it kind of goes both ways, in that some students, I think this happens more when we get older and when people get to college and start having the opportunity to actually, choose or request certain professors and things like that, because you can figure out like which teachers you're going to learn from better. Of course, some people use that as just, well, I've heard this one has a reputation of being tougher or easier or whatever, but But it can be used to actually think personality-wise, what methods work better for me too. So there's some people that an ESTJ teacher is exactly what they need. I think my son is one of them in some areas because he's an ESTP, but he responds well to ESTJs. Probably because they're the ones that most don't allow themselves to be bullied by him. And so they when you stand up to him, he's automatically going to respect you more. Whereas the ones that kind of baby him or try to appeal to feelings or those kind of aspects, those things are never going to improve the relationship for him, and so it's always going to stay the same or make it worse.
I remember that he felt that he respected the character of Al Giardello in Homicide Life in the Street.
And that's the type of person in real life that he, his first soccer coach. I've often used it as an example because he was this Uruguayan guy who, first season of soccer, these are like 4 and 5-year-olds and the parents that he's talking to. He opens his first practice like a sort of introduction to the parents with, I have won 47 games in a row as coach. I have never lost and I don't intend to start now. Like I said, this is 4 and 5-year-olds and their parents. And it was like, whoa.
What?
This wasn't okay, I want the kids to have fun. It was like, we are going
and
to
I can
win.
imagine him standing there like that.
Yeah, like we have always won. We will
Yeah.
continue to win.
It's like losing is not acceptable. But the thing is he was perfect for Morgan because it was like he had been in, it wasn't the first sports he'd done, it was his first soccer. And then in the other previous sports, he had played basketball and he had played baseball. And the coaches he'd had were very much, okay, these are little kids. We're going to talk to them like babies and everything's going to be, oh, would you like to do this? And then when Morgan would respond with his usual challenging way of, no, we're not going to, I don't want to do that. Then it was like, well, okay, maybe we should try. Whereas with Coach Espina, the soccer coach, it was like, he would go up to him and say, this is what I need you to do. This. And then he would move on. He didn't stay for him to argue or anything. It was just, this is the way, it was like, get with the program or move on, which is exactly what worked for him because he didn't have any opportunity to like argue with it. It was just, well, do I want to do this thing? If I do, then I'm going to go ahead and do it. If I don't, then I'll do something else. But it was like the choice was his, whether or not to take the action. But it wasn't a negotiation or something where he could exert his will on anyone. It was just, this is the program, get with it or don't.
Mm-hmm.
So some people respond well to that kind of teaching or coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Other people not so much. Other people, that would be exactly the worst kind of thing you could do. Because they would retreat from that and give up entirely, not want to continue doing anything because they would feel like they had no opportunity for nuance or discussion or anything to like exert their own viewpoint or anything. It was just accept this or go kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people can like come up with, like, people have like a typology just based on their experience of working with people without actually having names for the types. They'll just know, okay, this is the sort of person that this approach fits.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my younger brother talked about before he read, or before I'd gotten interested in Myers-Briggs or anything related to that, before we'd even really talked about it, when he first started reading about that, he was like, he was observant enough of people that he had basically had sort of ideas in his mind of those types already. He just didn't call them the same thing, same names or same, but it was like, as soon as he was reading things, he was like, yeah, I know all of these people. I just had sort of my own designation or my own words for these things. So that's why it always baffles me when you have the people that, they try to go to the opposite extreme of, they say, oh, well, if when you put a type and you call it a name like the architect or the performer or whatever, then you're pigeonholing them into this one thing. And so you have to only look at functions. And they're this long
shorthand function list instead. The thing is, what you realize when you do that is that you take it, it's just as much of a stereotype the other direction. You're basically like, oh, you're this brain model, and then instead of like applying it to the actual situation, like, so it's frustrating to me that those people will say like, oh, these types that anyone who has never studied typology can clearly see exist from just living and observing people, and then you're going to try to deny that exists because it doesn't fit into your function model. That just doesn't make any sense.
I mean, it's almost as if like you see it in like American and British type, like the writers are writing these characters that are clear artisans and guardians, and it's not as if, what, have they secretly been reading David Keirsey? They've just observed these patterns,
right? And that's honestly like when I see characters that, we talked about homicide before, and I bring it up a lot just because, I mean, the reason that I had my son watch that in the first place, well, I thought he would enjoy it because he said he liked shows that had good characterization and showed like, growth in characters and stuff. And I said, well, this is, a great example of that because the characters are written so consistently. And when I see that, I do start to think, well, maybe they have read about something, because it seems like when you have sort of lazy writing, you have characters that do sort of seem to fit a type, and then a particular episode, they just act wildly out of character with no explanation. And usually it's just because it was a plot convenience. Like they needed this plot to happen. So it was like they looked at it as, oh, well, these are the characters we have. So one of the characters has to fit this thing for the plot. So let's just use this one, without thinking how that character would actually respond to that situation. Whereas better writing of characters is to say, okay, here, what if we took that character and dropped them into this plot? How would they react, and where would the plot then go from the way this character would behave? And that's why, to me, good shows like Homicide and stuff like that, you see the example of that because they weren't necessarily set on, okay, this is the plot that we have to have happen, regardless of what these characters would actually do.
And you actually got that in Game of Thrones, where the actual writer would absolutely, because the George R. R. Martin would he would have the character and he would just like play it out. He didn't have the plot in advance at all. It would and it would really be what is going from the inside of the character. Then they had the problem when they did the final 2 seasons, and the guys who had written the television version of it, and they worked out an ending. Then it went to the opposite, where you had characters just doing stuff to get into particular reasons, and characterization went completely out of the window, and all of the characters lost their brains and did stupid stuff. And that's why the final 2 seasons of Game of Thrones are really bad in terms of characterization, because it's people just doing stuff, just being ciphers, just like not just, it's like, why would they do it? It makes it less real. That's ultimately what makes it real drama, is when it's like a real person, even if like it's fake, you still think of the character as a real person in a fictional world. And you might even like talk about them.
Why, at least at the beginning, Homicide was able to do that so successfully, since they were based on real cops. So they had a lot of that sort of template for all that already given to them. And even if they combined some people into a character, or the opposite, divided certain characters into multiple, they still had the basis for that. But yeah, what you were saying about Game of Thrones, I've seen that with over the years with daytime soap operas that I watched. It would win in phases, where it just seemed like there were periods where the writers who were in charge at that time knew how to keep characters consistent, and then you had ones where it was just completely all over the place based on what they decided they wanted to do with them.
I think the most popular and successful books and movies that we've ever had were because they had good characterization, and because they fit these profiles that are readily observable, like by humans everywhere.
And just with characterization, it lasts so long as well. It really is
forever.
What I mean is that, so you can have a great line and it's gone in a few seconds. But if you've got a great character, it's there with you for the whole time that you're with that character. So if you actually have a great character and just stick within that character, it's the holy grail.
And that's
whereas the
why I
line
think
is just gone.
when I talked about the soap operas, why that you had certain actors that stayed on the show for a long time, that really they sort of what's the word I'm looking for, like superseded, I don't know if that's the right word, but like basically it didn't matter if the particular writers were worse, because they were good enough actors that they made it believable, because they had put such a stamp on that character that it was like, even if the writing doesn't quite make sense or the dialogue isn't what they would change enough of it, put enough of themselves in that, because they knew the character better than the writers did, and make it so the audience would still believe this was the same character. So it's not easy to do that, but I think some of them were able to be around long enough and probably get enough clout that they were able to either change dialogue or kind of change things in a way that they kept the character more consistent than it would have been if they had changed actors or didn't have as good a grip on the character.
But one of the weird things is a lot of those characters in soaps, and I get the impression that most of them are artisans, and it's like, well, they're not meant to be the most rational soap characters anyway, doing impulsive things.
Well, and the thing is that the funny thing about that is that especially in recent years, where it's become such a popular trend, at least in the U.S. and I think in a lot of other places too, to see deviation from the standard guardian behavior as being like disorders and mental illnesses instead of just natural behavior. That you've seen on some of those shows that it's actually been sort of explained that way. It's like you have the artisan characters, but then when you have the guardian characters do the same thing the artisan characters, then that's them with some sort of illness that causes them to behave that way. So it's like for years where it was sort of like, well, this character was supposed to be like the paragon of virtue, but the plot called for them to have a bunch of secret affairs, and we just kind of wrote that off as, well, it's a soap opera, so it happens. Now we have this scientific explanation we can give, for why they behave this way or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of a goofy thing, I think, but
it is. You mentioned that some of the good characters are either, I think you kind of alluded to, either accidentally or on purpose written based on the types. I found it very fascinating. I read through all the Harry Potter stuff when I was younger, and since then came across a book that was all of, what's the author's name? Her internal notes, though, and she studied Jung's archetypes quite a bit. Rowling.
Yeah. Yeah, she took some things from mythology as well.
That too.
Yeah.
That too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I noticed about that. When I saw the films on television, I thought the acting is awful, but these are good plots.
Yeah, I think the books did well because she pulled from so many things. I mean, mythology, herbology, even astrology, and definitely Jung, the kind of roles that people tend to fill in life.
Yeah, well, if you like, Babylon 5, I'll just say
one
that.
of the two guys who created Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was into the temperament theory. Read that, and if I recall, the other one wasn't. So they kind of like argued about how much of that should be in their stuff. But the original comic books, they did create the 4 turtles to at least one of them did, to sort of represent the temperaments. So you can see that in some of in the other versions of it for TV and movies. Again, they changed the characters based on what they wanted them to do plot wise, but at least in the original comic books, they were sort of more in that mold.
I think one of the co-creators of Ninja Turtles was married to Julie Strain.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a reference for people.
Eastman and I forget the other guy's name.
It might be Eastman. Eastman might have been married to Julie Strain. It's an old reference, folk, in the 90s. There's a 6'1" tall woman. Julie Strain.
Yeah,
All right,
I know
I'm
who
gonna
she is, but I
have to-
didn't remember that about that she was married to the Ninja Turtle guy. But I do remember they're like 10 years apart from each other or something like that in age, so they weren't exactly contemporaries. They sort of came together by accident through a series of interesting circumstances.
So,
but yeah, I think it was in the comic books that Raphael was actually supposed to be the leader of the Turtles, but he was the NF type, so he had like all of these long internal monologues about was he really fit to lead, and was that really his role in society, and all that kind of stuff. Whereas in the TV and movie versions, they usually just kind of made him the sarcastic one instead of, and they made Leonardo the leader because he was the guardian, so it sort of fit more with contemporary ideas of what a leader should be.
Lost my train of thought.
It's currently in the Cleveland station.
Train has run away.
Yes, the train has run away.
All right,
So-
I'm gonna have to run off
Yeah.
here too.
So, are there any other myths that you would like to dispel, Christen, about guardians that you'd like to tell the people out there? Because there's not that many that they actually interact with.
Yeah, I mean, nothing else comes to the top of my head right now. I don't know. Do you want to? It might go better if you throw out some common myths.
Oh, what about this? That they're always cooperative. That they're always by the book, almost like, and
That's probably true that I'd say there's like I have a strong tendency for that. And that is the biggest thing I went through growing up. I would say battle with my parents. That I have an ESFP mom and an INTJ dad. So neither one of them is like, you don't have to do things a certain way other than if there's like a higher reason for it or if it's situational. So my mom still jokes to this day that she made me fun because getting out of that very particular way of doing things.
Well, that's actually brings up a good thing, because we talked about a while back the idea that people talk about when teenage rebellion and all that, and it comes natural for like SP types and even like the N types, because they kind of have that attitude of, well, I'm not like the norm in society kind of thing. So when we talked about SJs wanting to be normal, like how does an SJ teenager rebel? Like what did you have a version of that? Was it just being different than your parents, or was there something that did you actually feel like you rebelled against something?
Yeah, I don't remember having a sense of rebelling against things in my teenage years. I mean, I like fit what society wanted out of me in those years. I did well in school. I did athletics and stuff like that. The biggest turmoil I recall was actually with my parents, because they were like, just because a teacher says you have to do something doesn't mean you have to. Or just because a coach says train this way doesn't mean you have to. Like there might be a different way to do it, a better way to do it, just whatever. So that was my biggest turmoil that I recall from my teenage years, was my parents trying to push me outside of like the narrow lane that was drawn out for me by my teachers and coaches and other people around.
That's funny, because it definitely does seem like the opposite of what people usually expect. The parents are like, listen to your teachers, don't try to do your own thing.
Yeah, that's like the opposite of all the advice I got growing up from my parents.
And see, my father's INTJ, but he was definitely very particular about doing things a certain way. He didn't necessarily say blindly follow your teachers, but he was definitely about there is a right and wrong way to do things, and you shouldn't step outside of the right way. So.
Yeah.
Christen, so one of the things that frequently comes up that I've frequently asked Jeff about, and I even asked David Mark Keirsey about this, the son of the psychologist, is that so NFs are meant to be cooperative as well. So like SJs. I just wondered, what have you noticed when teaching NF children are they also by the book, or are they cooperative in a
Oh.
different way?
Yeah, they're cooperative. They are most often eager to say yes or to want to do, whatever. If I'm teaching them something pretty directly, yeah, they're cooperative. They take it in. They do their best. I, if anything, have to be careful that I'm not like overstepping and imposing my own thing, and that I'm considering who they are and how they learn, and more so what their interests are. And that has been very difficult in lessons with them. When I flip the script, especially with reading, I never saw a reason for me to tell a kid what book to read. They can go pick out their own book, and or their own materials online. And the NF students that I've had, they were the least likely to freely pick a book. They would probably want to pick a book that they thought I would like or that I wanted to recommend. So it sometimes was, or that like a teacher or a parent, especially, that parents would want them to read.
I
had to push.
As a teacher.
Yeah, I had to push quite a bit to be like, you've asked me so much about about XYZ. Why don't we, go to that section or go look at this online and find something for you?
Because not only did the teachers always tell me what books to read, but on those rare occasions where they actually let me pick, then I would pick something and they would say, "Oh, that's not right for you," or that's not your level. You should be reading this other book, whatever. It was like over and over again. They didn't want me to read the things I was actually interested in. So
yeah, I mean, I just, as long as they're learning, they're learning. I tried to keep a ratio where it was a lot less of me telling them what to read, and the majority of time was them choosing materials.
You talked about clashing with your parents as a teenager, but I'm curious, because you had that, doing what teachers expected of you or what society expects of you. Were you ever bothered a lot by the other kids that didn't act like that? Did you have any confrontations with those kids, or would you just do your own thing and not worry about it?
No, I just did my own thing.
Okay.
I didn't really. I never felt a need to make another kid stand in line, so to say. Now, if they were trying to, if it was like an artisan or a jokester type person trying to get me to get in on something with them, I'm like, don't get me in trouble, leave me out of that.
Yeah, it's
like
funny
you're on your own.
Again, back to those like stereotypes where people look at, if this behavior must match this temperament. I have a long time online friend that I originally was thinking was probably some SP type, because she would talk about how she was late all the time, she would get in trouble at school, she was kind of hot-headed, all these kind of things where if you just went by these things, you'd say, oh, this is like an SP type. But then when we actually got into discussing the reasons why she would get in trouble at school, a lot of the time it was other kids were not doing what they were supposed to be doing, and she would confront them about it. And that's why she got in trouble. And so the more and more we talked about it, the more and more it became clear that she's an ESFJ, and she's one of those where it's like breaking rules is like one of the cardinal sins. You're not supposed to do that. And she put it upon herself to like enforce them, because she felt like the authority figures were not doing that well enough. They were just letting people run wild and do what they wanted to do.
Right. So I remember you said there, Christen, you've got to get going, haven't you? So
yep.
Right. So I'll wind up this, folks, and I'm going to end the broadcast, and we're going to chat for a little bit. And then Christen is going to go off. So it was a little bit shaky there at the start, but it got good in the end.
Slow start.
Because we were improvised this, folk, because like someone wasn't able to make it. I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to shame her. I'm going to this podcast.